It's been a while since we've been together on the podcast, James.
Yeah, why is that, Martha? You've been you've been at weddings in, Lisbon, the Hamptons, living the high life, where I've been taking the low road through the podcast.
Hey, it's wedding season for me. I'm at one almost every weekend at the moment.
I see it all over your Instagram. It is great. But listen, the question of the day is, where do you stand on beards? No more beardos. Did you hear that from Pete Hegseth? He wants troops to be clean-shaven.
Yeah, we're both clean-shaven, aren't we? I got rid of my beard this morning in the honour of the Secretary of Defence. You got rid of yours.
Thank you. Yeah, well, listen, I'm honoured, and do keep it up. But yeah, I tell you, the funniest thing for me wasn't the beards. Apparently there's a new rule for troops: meet height and weight requirements twice a year. Now, weight's one thing, but see the height. See if you're a particular height at the start of the year. You have to hope you be the same height at the end, you think?
Well, Donald Trump always seems to grow a couple of inches, doesn't he, every time he has his official measurements done.
I'm James Matthews in the Sky News Bureau here in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Martha Kellner in Los Angeles.
Hi, Martha. As we sit down to record, a government shutdown is looming. It isn't just about the politicians, of course. Real people will feel it too. National parks could close, flights, they could get cancelled. The National Mall, the iconic strip between the Capitol and Lincoln Memorial here in DC, that could be chained up. So it's a big deal.
It certainly is, but also a massive Department of War meeting in Quantico, Virginia today. The War Secretary declares war on hair, as we were discussing. But is this the start of the army taking more and more control of American cities? James, the Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, summoned US generals and admirals from around the world to Quantico, Virginia this morning. At the top of the military tree, hauled back to the States for a briefing from the boss. In fact, two bosses.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, one of the headlines was the war on hair, the very headline you just used, Martha. I would say to Pete Hegseth, welcome to the party, Defence Secretary. But yeah, I mean, Quantico, the place that many of us are familiar with. We've heard of the stuff of movies and all of that. Silence of the Lambs, remember that? The Jodie Foster, the FBI training centre where she went. Well, looking at the pictures coming in from that place today, there were a few Hannibal Lecters, Martha, who showed up for this Pete Hegseth briefing. Never in the history of Quantico have so many short haircuts and bulging veins in uniform gathered under the one roof. 800 of the military's top brass were there, hauled back home, of course, from their military posts to hear two speeches, one from Pete Hegseth, Defence Secretary, and from their Commander-in-Chief. It was the best and the brightest from the US military, four-star generals, fleet admirals, you name it. I did wonder what they must have thought, Martha, you know, being lectured by Pete Hegseth, former TV presenter, albeit one, you know, who was an infantry officer in the National Guard, did perform active duty. But, you know, this is a guy who would have been making the tea for some of these guys in the field. And then, of course, you had the president, Commander-in-Chief today, but Vietnam draft dodger back in the day.
I also wonder about the wisdom, James, of having all these high-ranking military people in the same room. First of all, because of security, the whole world was given a 2-week notice period that this was happening. And B, surely in the modern age, this meeting could have taken place on some secure online communication device. Signal, for example. Wink, wink, Mr. Hegseth. And, you know, Hegseth was talking about the war on warriors, wasn't he? And I couldn't help but remember that there's a book that came out over a year ago by the same name, The War on Warriors, by one Pete Hegseth himself.
Yeah, and he couldn't help but remind us of it, Martha. When he mentioned that phrase, he did that old thing, the stage whisper, War on Warriors. I hear someone wrote a book about that, you know, the casual grift. That book actually was an attack on the woke military long before his political days. And now he's in a position to put it into practice. The whole thing, this speech, it was a reorientation of the military and its direction as he sees it. And he did rather roll back several decades of military evolution, I think, back to an old school philosophy that included a number of things, principally putting woke behind him, but also, loosening rules around discipline. Views will vary as to the wisdom of what he had to say, and some will definitely support him and say that that's what a successful military needs, but critics are lining up too.
Watching that speech, though, I think you can tell that Hegseth used to be a TV man, because he has a keen understanding of his audience, or rather the audience he wants to reach, not necessarily the uniformed leaders in the room, but the people at home. He spoke about too many people being in the military based on race and gender quotas, as he sees it. He spoke about this ridiculous quest, in his words, to have historic firsts in the military. No more dudes in dresses, he said. It's time, he said, to clear out the debris.
Should our enemies choose foolishly to challenge us, they will be crushed by the violence, precision, and ferocity of the War Department. In other words, to our enemies, F-A-F-O. If necessary, our troops can translate that for you. Another way to put it is peace through strength, brought to you by the warrior ethos.
F-A-F-O. You know what that means, Martha?
I do, yeah.
Go on then.
F around and find out.
Yes, indeed. And Hegseth, he also took a pot shot at those officers he reckons don't look the part.
If the Secretary of War can do regular, hard PT, so can every member of our joint force. Frankly, it's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. It's a bad look. It is bad, and it's not who we are. So whether you're an airborne ranger or a chairborne ranger, a brand new private or a 4-star general, you need to meet the height and weight standards and pass your PT test.
Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, was pretty quick to respond to Hegseth's comments on people being overweight. Newsom wrote that if you can't be fat and in the military, then the commander-in-chief must go, in his words too. And trolling has become Newsom's political currency at the moment. But some might say he has a point.
Many would say that edgy Twitter game that Gavin Newsom's got at the moment, is working. It needles Trump and is doing a job that the Democrats are failing at currently, failing to land a blow on Donald Trump. But the appearance thing was interesting. I mean, Pete Hegseth, he's a man who is groomed to within an inch of his life. And I don't know, perhaps he sees himself as the prototype for the American soldier. He spoke about no more beards, everybody should be shaven. Spoke about how it's tiring to see fat troops and fat generals, didn't want his son serving alongside them. And, this business of no more beardos, no more dudes in dresses. The era of unacceptable appearance is over, he said. If you don't want to shave and look professional, it's time for a new position or a new profession.
He doesn't want women in the military either, does he?
Yes, that was a key plank of what he had to say.
If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is. If that means no women qualify for some combat jobs, so be it. That is not the intent, but it could be the result. Either you can do the job, either you are disciplined, fit, and trained, or you are out. And that's why today, at my direction, and this is the first of 10 Department of War directives that are arriving at your commands as we speak and in your inbox. Today, at my direction, each service will ensure that every requirement for every combat MOS, for every designated combat arms position, returns to the highest male standard only.
Hegseth was talking about common sense, maximum lethality, as he put it, and authority for warfighters. That was the kind of tone of the speech. And, to many in the audience, that would have resonated. That is the kind of scenario that they signed up for. But so did 17% of active duty personnel that is female, who, of course, themselves qualified by their brains, brawn, and their fitness standards that they achieved in common with their male comrades.
This administration has been bragging about improving recruitment numbers for people into the military, but I can't help but think that there must be a lot of capable young women watching that speech from Pete Hegseth and thinking, you know what, that feels like a bit of a misogynistic institution and it's not for me. You know, I would think in this day and age, the way that modern warfare happens, that brains are as important as brawn these days. And, you know, that there is absolutely a place for women in the military. And I'm sure lots of men who are currently in the US military would feel exactly the same way and would have been quite appalled at what, you know, the Defence Secretary was saying today.
Yeah, I think you're right, Martha. You know, women who want to join the military, but also women who are in place in the military, career soldiers, pilots, you know, Navy personnel, who have performed successful roles over many years. You know, I suppose they will wonder where they fit into the Hegseth vision of their military, their career.
Mm-hmm. And people like, you know, serving United States Senator Tammy Duckworth, who lost both her legs, you know, in active duty service. She's been forced to watch that sort of rhetoric from Hegseth.
Yeah, this whole thing was billed as Pete Hegseth's big event, which it was in the beginning, but I think Donald Trump found out about it and he was added on to the bill. Yeah, he was clearly the headline act. And that in itself was fascinating. I mean, Hegseth was newsy, but the line of the day, I think, came from Donald Trump when he spoke about an invasion within, you know, returning to this theme of an enemy within America's own borders.
And I told Pete, we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
Dangerous cities being used as training grounds for the military, Martha. I think that will make people in cities like Memphis, Chicago, in fact, he mentioned Chicago, Los Angeles, where you are, Portland, that's not very far from where you are, who, you know, there is National Guard in some of these places, National Guard on their way to some of these places. Trump said, we're going to straighten them out one by one. And he said to his audience, this will involve some of the people in this room. You know, we're talking about the military top brass. And amidst all this discussion about the extent to which Trump will use the military to perform domestic duties that he sees as appropriate, you know, that's a big discussion here. It's a big concern in the places that he is targeting. And I think in places like Chicago, LA, they will have listened to that and have heard evidence of a president that they accuse of forming essentially a private army to perform political work on his behalf.
Yeah, and, you know, listen, it can get a little dodgy on the streets of Venice Beach, but it is not a war zone and it is certainly not a training ground for the military. And let's be absolutely clear, what he wants to do here, it is not abstract training exercises for the military. You know, this would be US citizens subject to military control.
Yeah, it's a discussion clearly that will continue and there will be a broad range of opinion. I know that, Martha, because I can tell you I was doing some broadcasting earlier on and, you know, so I was doing a bit. There was a very quick changeover with a US military man who'd been invited as a guest.
Right.
So I was sort of speaking to the camera, could sense the door opening an inch and, you know, trying to ignore it. This was this gentleman, our guest. He was actually watching and listening as we changed positions. As he walked in the room, he said, "Oh, I'm not sure about that," or words to that effect. He went on air, and he started his first answer with, "Well, I disagree with pretty much everything I've just heard."
Not the first time that's happened, I'm sure.
No. Well, of course, he came out the studio and, you know, we passed in the office and he said, "Oh, I hope you weren't offended by what I said at the start there." And I said, "Only mildly."
So Donald Trump's talking about sending in the US military to Chicago based on what a friend of his has said the situation in Chicago is like. He's spoken about sending in the military to Portland, Oregon, based on a news report which has since been debunked. It's not exactly the sort of rigorous fact-finding you would expect your president to be doing before deploying the National Guard. But anyway, that's what he's doing. He said he's sending them into Portland, to Chicago, and to Memphis. Just to take each of those situations in isolation, on Monday, the Illinois governor, J.B. Pritzker, said the Department of Homeland Security had requested 100 National Guard soldiers to be deployed in Chicago to protect ICE agents, so those are the immigration agents. Just a few weeks back, Donald Trump said Chicago was, in his words, about to find out why it's called the Department of War. He also said that Memphis, which is a blue city in the deep red state of Tennessee, is suffering, in his words, from tremendous levels of violent crime. He authorized the use of the National Guard there as well.
Yeah, in Democratic Portland, it's a slightly different story. Trump has called the city war-ravaged, which has prompted Oregon lawmakers to take to social media. And, you know, they've been showing videos of what is a place far from war-ravaged, but actually very peaceful. People protesting, yes, outside ICE facilities, but doing so in a very peaceful way, you know, banners, dancing, and so on. That hasn't stopped the president. He's posted on Truth Social that he is authorizing full force, if necessary, in Portland. So currently this is all going to the courts. Portland is filing a federal lawsuit arguing the administration has overreached and acted unlawfully. So the question is where it all goes from here and how bad it gets. There is the theory, of course, you see from Trump's opponents, certainly, that he's trying to provoke trouble in democratic cities. You've seen, well, much of it in LA, Martha. The theory goes that he provokes trouble, that gives him an excuse to invoke the Insurrection Act, and then can legally send in the troops. It is a move that would have authoritarianism written all over it, of course, but, you know, those same critics, they say, well, that is the aspiration. And, of course, Portland, Oregon, that has seen trouble in the past. During the George Floyd riots, there was sustained scenes of kind of rioting and violence.
Yeah, the concern among Democratic politicians in cities like LA and Portland is that this leads to a kind of us versus them situation, and that it blurs the line between the police and the military, and because of that makes violence more likely and, like you say, could lead to Donald Trump being able to say, well, yeah, see, I told you so. And in the background, you have these officials trying to preempt what the president is going to do next, which, as you know, is incredibly difficult to do. So the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, they've sued the Trump administration to stop them from deploying National Guard troops there. We saw the National Guard in big numbers on the streets of LA back in June during the anti-immigration protests. Well, a judge in California ruled earlier this month that that was an illegal act by the Trump administration. So there's kind of this battle raging in the courts as well at the moment. Anyway, that's all for today. We'll keep an eye on that government shutdown and bring you the latest when we have it. The Senate voted late into Tuesday night to try and avoid a shutdown, but to no avail. Neither party could get the required 60 votes to stop the shutdown from happening. Plus, you and Mark James talked a lot on the podcast this week about the Israeli-American peace plan that dominated Monday. Well, Trump on Tuesday gave Hamas 3 or 4 days, in his words, to accept the deal or else. But it looks, for all intents and purposes, as if Hamas will reject it.
Thanks very much, Martha. That's all we've got time for today. I'll see you in a few weeks, Martha. I'm going for my hip replacement tomorrow morning.
Yes, good luck on behalf of all Trump100 listeners. Please come back soon in one piece, hobbling or otherwise. I'll be cartwheeling back into the studio in a few weeks, so I'll speak to you then. Look forward to it.
Do send us your emails at Trump100@sky.uk, and we'll be back on Friday morning.
See you then.
All the best.